Good morning. Happy new month, 1st of May. This year is racing on, isn't it? I'm looking today at John chapter 21, that wonderful experience that some of the disciples had when they went out fishing after Jesus had risen. And we'd had the stories of Jesus appearing to the disciples, appearing to Peter, appearing to the disciples without Thomas and then with Thomas. And then it feels like John has finished his gospel and he's concluded it with those wonderful words in John 20, 31 and 32. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. That's why John wrote what he wrote. He wrote it so that we would know who Jesus is and that we would believe in him. And he's concluded his book. And then I think perhaps he remembered that amazing morning when they were fishing, when they decided to go fishing. Some of them, chapter 21 says, Simon Peter, Thomas the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, and two others of the disciples were together. Of course, John was one of the two sons of Zebedee, and perhaps as he was finishing writing his gospel, he remembered this incident, and he thought, oh, I can't leave that out, I'll put it in. And we know the story very well, I'm sure you've read it many, many times. How they went out fishing. Of course, they were fishermen. We don't know that Thomas was a fisherman, but we know that James and John were fishermen and that Peter was a fisherman. And when you think about it, they were in a kind of no man's land, weren't they? Jesus had died and risen again. He'd appeared to them several times. He'd appeared to different ones of them. But what they'd been doing for the previous 3.5 years had ended. All this travelling around the country, preaching and healing, it was over. The leader was gone. Yes, he was risen from the dead, but everything had changed, and they were rudderless. They hadn't had that great commission that Jesus gave them at the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles before he ascended into heaven, when he told them to go to all the world. They hadn't been with him, as it's recorded in the end of Matthew, being told to go into all the world. They hadn't had their commissioning. Yes, Jesus had said to them, as the Father sent me, so send I you. But that had been at least 2 weeks previously, and they were in limbo. Now, being in limbo is a dangerous place to be, because what is that saying? It's not biblical, but there's a saying that says, the devil finds work for idle hands to do. You know, they were idle. They didn't have a purpose. They'd obviously gone back up north country because they were at the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee. And, of course, everything else, all the things that we'd been reading about just before had happened in the upper room in Jerusalem. So they had gone back home, really, to Capernaum. And perhaps Peter had gone back to his family home. We presume his wife was still alive. Certainly his mother-in-law had been healed, hadn't she? You remember at the beginning of Mark's Gospel. So they went home to Galilee. And they decided to go fishing. Peter said to them, let's go fishing. Let's go fishing. And they went back fishing. And while they were out fishing, they fished as they normally did. They fished at night. It seems that the fish were easier to catch at night. They quite often fished at night. and all night they caught nothing. Now we know the rest of the story. We know that Jesus appeared as the sun was rising on the shore and spoke to them. But I'm going to stop there because I'm thinking these disciples, I wonder whether in their mind was, well, I suppose we just go back to what we were doing before he came. We just live our lives just the way it was before we became followers of Jesus. What else is there for us to do? What are we meant to do? They hadn't yet grasped the international nature of the gospel. They hadn't yet understood that Jesus was going to send them to every part of the world. And indeed, in some ways, the Lord had to push them out of the nest, as it were, rather like a bird pushes the babies out of the nest. When Stephen's martyrdom happened, and they were, after a number of years, they were pushed out of Jerusalem by the persecution to get them to go to every part of the world. They hadn't really understood the full world nature of the gospel. So they went back to what they were doing before they became followers of Jesus. And it was just the thought, there they were doing what they were good at. They were doing what they were good at. They were good fishermen. You had to be able to catch fish to make a living as a fisherman. And that night they caught nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I think what this thought in my mind today is, you can't go back. You can't go back to who you were before you found Jesus. You have to go forward and find out what he wants you to do, where he wants you to go, who he wants you to minister to, what he wants you to be about. You can't go back. These fishermen discovered that going back to fishing was fruitless. They caught nothing. I think God was saying to them, you can't go back. You have to go forward. You have to keep following Jesus. The past is gone. Each day is a new day to serve Jesus. Each day is a new day. Going back was not an option. That's my thought for the day. Have a great day. Be blessed, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.